Good morning. The University of Hawaiʻi Law Review welcomes you to its Spring 2023 symposium entitled Honoring Women in the Law and a Critical Inquiry into Women's Rights in the Past, Present, and Future. We are Sarah Ann Mao and Suhyeon Burns, the editors-in-chief of the University of Hawaiʻi Law Review. We're pleased to have you here.
We're also honored to be joined by Dean Camille Nelson, our dean here at the William S. Richardson School of Law. We are honored to introduce her. Prior to her appointment as dean of our school, Dean Camille Nelson served as dean at the American University Washington School of Law and at Suffolk University Law School in Boston. She has been a law professor at the Morris A. Dean School of Law at Hofstra University and the St. Louis University School of Law, and has taught in a variety of subjects at law schools in Europe, Canada, and across the United States.
Dean Nelson's scholarship focuses on health law, criminal law and procedure, comparative law, and leadership. She's been published in many esteemed journals such as the Berkeley Journal of Criminal Law and the Yale Journal of Law and Feminism. Her professional service engagements include serving on the executive and steering committees of the Association of American Law Schools and the board of the Institute for the Advancement of the American Legal System. Her scholarship and leadership in higher education have been recognized through a variety of awards and honors, and the National Jurist recently listed her as one of the most influential people in legal education. To commence today's symposium, Dean Nelson will share welcome remarks. We will now turn it over to her.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Suhyeon. I really appreciate that kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the University of Hawaiʻi William S. Richardson School of Law, it is my great pleasure to welcome you. I recognize that everyone is very busy, and so we are very, very thrilled. We're just delighted that you've chosen to prioritize this very important conversation that will be central to our Law Review's Spring Symposium, entitled, importantly, Honoring Women in the Law and a Critical Inquiry into Women's Rights in the Past, Present, and Future. I want to extend a heartfelt welcome to the members of the audience, practitioners, scholars, students, faculty, staff, members of the local legal community, and those zooming in from near and far. Thank you so much for joining us for this very timely and relevant event. The program is exceptional. I hope you've had a chance to look through it. What will be discussed during this symposium remains critical to the rights of many people, most notably the rights of women and gender minorities, and also to the rights of many members of our communities who must navigate intersectional identities. Honoring Women in the Law and a Critical Inquiry into Women's Rights in the Past, Present, and Futures is aptly titled and seeks to honor as well where we are coming from and to anticipate and to navigate where we are, and crucially, I think, where we ought to be headed. For instance, last summer, the United States Supreme Court decision in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization sent shockwaves throughout the nation and internationally when it overturned Roe versus Wade, dismantling, as some have remarked, 50 years of legal protection and paving the way for individual states to curtail or outright ban abortion rights. It was this decision and its lingering and anticipated impacts that inspired the University of Hawaiʻi Law Review to prepare today's program. The Law Review editors and leaders have worked incredibly diligently. They worked so hard and with great forethought. I'm tremendously grateful for their comprehensive and thoughtful planning, which has resulted in what I know will be an exceptional program. There is an ongoing need for students to be engaged in the transformative work that is the work of inclusive justice. It is important that we engage across differences and disagreements in ways that open up space for inclusive justice, including, as we are doing here today, by engaging with academic scholarship and discourse. I think it bodes well for our collective futures that our students have so professionally and positively chosen to engage with some of the most challenging and important issues of this era. I am inspired by their commitment, their bravery, and their light. I know you join me in thanking them for assembling us here today. I am grateful for your commitment to the issues at the core of today's symposium. Thank you so much for being here. I know you will have an engaging and inspiring day. Thanks so much and enjoy the day. I'll now turn it back to our wonderful students.
Thank you very much for your impactful words and incredible remarks, Dean Nelson. We are very lucky to have such an insightful visionary as our dean, and our law school couldn't be in more capable hands. Again, we are Sarah Ann Mao and Suhyeon Burns, the editors-in-chief of the University of Hawaiʻi Law Review. On behalf of the entire Law Review, welcome. We are so excited for you to join us.
We have a wonderful group of speakers for the following 4 panels. Right after this, from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., Women and Gender Minorities in Legal Practice. And from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m., Women in the State and Federal Judiciary. Then we will break for lunch from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. We will resume at 1 p.m. with the impact of Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization and reproductive rights in Hawaii. And finally, at 2 p.m., the legacy of Patsy T. Mink and Title IX. Before we continue, we must extend a sincere and heartfelt thank you to several very important people. First, our amazing group of speakers. To our panelists and moderators, thank you for your generous time, involvement, and support to make Law Review and Symposium possible. We're so grateful.
To Dean Nelson, thank you for your welcome remarks today and for your steadfast leadership always. Thank you also to Christy, her fantastic assistant, for all of her help.
Thank you to Dean Nakamura for your unwavering support and guidance of the Richardson student body. Thank you also to Tracy, the administrative and physical support specialist, for her incredible help.
To Dean Merkay and Professor Levinson, our advisors, thank you for your valuable guidance and counsel. We always greatly appreciate it. And special thank you to Heather, Dean Merkay's assistant, for her brilliant help.
To Julie Suinaga, our faculty support specialist, we extend our warmest thank you for so generously giving your time and efforts, and for all of the invaluable behind-the-scenes support.
To Professor Pettit Toledo, thank you for your support, invaluable insight, and guidance. We truly appreciate it.
We want to extend our sincerest thank you and great appreciation to the incredible John Van Dyke Fund, to Professor Sherry Broder, Professor John Van Dyke's widow, and to former Associate Dean Carol Monley, who both created the fund. Thank you for so generously continuing to support the Law Review to help make Symposium, as well as our journal's other endeavors, possible. On behalf of the entire Law Review, thank you so much.
Thank you very much to SEED, the Office of Student Equity, Excellence, and Diversity, and SAPFB, the Student Activity and Program Fee Board, for their generous funding to help make this event possible.
Finally, thank you to our amazing team of Law Review members. The Symposium and this journal's endeavors wouldn't be possible with everyone's efforts and hard work.
So we also wanted to briefly share why we selected this topic before going too far. When we first planned the symposium, we began asking ourselves, women's rights, reproductive rights, social justice, can we do this? Is this something that we should do? It's such a big and sensitive topic, but we chose to pursue it because of the undeniable importance, timeliness, and relevance.
Dean Nelson just mentioned this summer on June 24, 2022, when the United States Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, it sent a shock throughout the nation, a decision that both, quote, dismantled 50 years of legal protection, end quote, and in the words of former US President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama, relegated the most intensely personal decision someone can make to the whims of politicians and ideologues, attacking the essential freedoms of millions of Americans.
The impacts are jarring and implications far-reaching. In addition to abortion access, other important rights are threatened too. For example, Justice Clarence Thomas wrote that certain other landmark rulings should be reconsidered, including established rights to contraception access, same-sex marriage, same-sex relationships, as well as same-sex marriage. The influence of this decision does not only affect women's rights to abortion, but impacts our nation's bedrock principles, such as rights to freedom, expression, health and safety, equality, and so much more.
It is for these reasons, among others, like having many female members on our board, that we ultimately selected this topic and chose to address this issue that impacts not only us, our law school, and our legal community, but one that impacts our entire nation. And by somewhat of a coincidence, our symposium also happens to be during Women's History Month, a perfect opportunity to recognize and celebrate the significant contributions that women in law have made in a variety of fields. It seems like a momentous endeavor. How can we begin to address the injustices of our past, plaguing our present, and those threatening our future?
It's a collective and ongoing effort. We meet these challenges and seek to rise to the occasion with humility, patience, and curiosity. We aspire to shatter, or at least chip away at, the glass ceilings and obstacles, as well as the barriers that confine us. We recognize and stand hand in hand with another and with our allies, amplifying one another's voices. The inherently sensitive issue concerning women's rights, reproductive rights, and equality is one that carries a lot of weight. We humbly thank our wonderful group of speakers for being here today to discuss these important topics. And we thank you, our lovely audience, for also coming to the table with curiosity, respect, and a desire to learn, values that ground us amidst the winds, or lately gusts, of change and uncertainty.
As a law review, it is part of our mission to engage with and strive to contribute to the national discourse on emerging legal issues. We hope that this symposium will spur a critical conversation about the role of women in law, including in the federal and state judiciary systems, as well as the evolving issues in light of the shifting legal landscape surrounding civil rights. Thank you for being a part of this ongoing conversation.
And with that, we are pleased to get started with our first panel. With that, I would like to present and introduce one of my favorite TAs, Miss Courtney Choy. Courtney Choy was born and raised in Ewa Beach, Oahu, and is a proud graduate of Punahou School, UH Manoa's Scheidler College of Business, summa cum laude, and the William S. Richardson School of Law, cum laude. During law school, she served as an outside articles editor of the University of Hawaiʻi Law Review and received the Cali Excellence for the Future Award for the highest grade in law and society in China and alternative dispute resolution. As a rising 3L, she was selected to join a cohort of outstanding women law students from across the country to participate in a national fellowship focused on mentoring, supporting, and elevating women in the legal profession. Honored to have served as Miss Hawaii 2021 during the COVID-19 pandemic, Ms. Choy remains steadfast in her mission to deliver virtual and in-person programming through her social impact initiative entitled Women's Empowerment Through Partnership, aimed at equipping girls and women of all ages with the courage and confidence to achieve their dreams. With that, I'll hand it over to Courtney.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for that amazing and kind introduction. I'm just so incredibly honored and excited to be here and to be a part of this, our first panel, which is Women and Gender Minorities in Legal Practice. As you mentioned, it's a special month. It's Women's History Month, International Women's Day, but it also reminds us of the immense work that is left to be done in terms of ensuring that everyone, especially women in the legal profession, are represented. I would love to introduce our panelists for this first panel, beginning with United States Attorney for the District of Hawaii, U.S. Attorney Clare Connors. U.S. Attorney Clare Connors was raised on the island of Oahu and graduated from Punahou School. Ms. Connors is a 1996 graduate of Yale University, and in 2002 earned her JD from Harvard Law School. Ms. Connors returned home to Hawaii in 2004 to serve as an assistant U.S. attorney until 2011, where she later went on to serve as a civil litigator and partner at the law firm of Davis, Levin, Livingston until 2019. In 2019, Ms. Connors was appointed as the 16th Attorney General of Hawaii and was responsible for discharging various constitutional and statutory mandates. Since 2021, Ms. Connors has served as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Hawaii, overseeing the prosecution of federal crimes related to national security, public corruption, drug trafficking, violent crime, child exploitation, complex fraud, and other matters. Amongst her stellar career credits, including being on the cover of Midweek this past week, she was also the pro bono coordinator for the U.S. District Court of Hawaii and served as an adjunct professor at William S. Richardson School of Law. Our next panelist, which has just popped on, so I'll go back to her introduction, is Professor Maxine Burkett. She is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Oceans, Fisheries, Polar Affairs, and Professor of Law at the William S. Richardson School of Law. Professor Burkett, in her role, oversees the formulation and implementation of U.S. policy on a broad range of international issues concerning the oceans, the Arctic, the Antarctic, and marine conservation. Previously, Professor Burkett served as an expert senior advisor to Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, where her portfolio included climate-related migration, climate security, bilateral relationships with island nations, and Indigenous peoples engagement. As a professor of law, Professor Burkett was on the faculties of the University of Hawaii William S. Richardson School of Law and Colorado Law, where she has taught climate law and ocean and coastal law, and is a visiting professor at Harvard Medical School's Department of Global Health and Social Medicine. Our next panelist is Ms. Leinā'ala, Senior Associate Attorney at Earth Justice. Leinā'ala was born and raised in Hawaii on the islands of Kauai and Oahu, and is a 2011 graduate of the University of Berkeley School of Law. Ms. Lei started out her legal career at the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, working on a class action lawsuit to secure the rights of Native Hawaiian religious practitioners housed at Saguaro Correctional Facility in Arizona. Ms. Lei worked in private practice for several years before returning to the practice of public interest law with Earth Justice in 2018. Since joining Earth Justice, Ms. Lei has led successful litigation to enforce the state's solar water heater mandate, worked to restore stream flow to communities across the Pai'aina, and recently filed a youth climate lawsuit to reduce the state's transportation emissions as co-counsel with Our Children's Trust. Her areas of expertise include environmental review, endangered species protection, constitutional litigation, and protection of Native Hawaiian traditional and customary practices. Our next panelist is Ms. Ann Teranishi, President and Chief Executive Officer of American Savings Bank, or ASB. Ms. Ann Teranishi has been with ASB since 2007, and at ASB, Ms. Teranishi developed an enterprise-wide compliance program, leading the retail credit team to best-in-class fulfillment times for consumer loans and heading strategic initiatives to enhance ASB's quality of customer service. She also played a key role in transitioning ASB from traditional branch-centric operations to online and other self-service options, which have become increasingly popular with customers. Before banking, Ms. Teranishi was a commercial litigation attorney at Kobayashi Sugita and Goda. Ms. Teranishi holds a JD from the UC College of the Law, San Francisco, formerly University of California, Hastings College of the Law, and a BA in International Relations and Economics from Claremont McKenna College. Our final panelist for this incredible panel is Ms. Mia Yamamoto, criminal defense attorney and civil rights activist. Mia Yamamoto was born in the Poston concentration camp during World War II and is a highly accomplished attorney and influential figure for women, gender minorities, and people of color. first serving as a poverty lawyer at Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, and then a public defender for several years before entering private practice. Ms. Yamamoto is devoted to serving the underrepresented communities. In 2003, Ms. Yamamoto decided to publicly transition and became the first openly transgender lawyer in California history. Ms. Yamamoto has spoken on various panels discussing topics such as race and criminal justice, and has published articles about transgender lawyers and community organizing within the minority law community. Ms. Yamamoto's work and commitment to social justice has earned her various awards, such as being named one of the 100 most influential lawyers in California, and as a recipient of the Rainbow Key Award and the Harvey Milk Legacy Award. I would love to take the space now to introduce our entire panel, which is here. Hi, everyone. So first, to start the panel, I would love to just open the floor up to remarks from anyone, and to also ask for all the panelists why you decided to attend law school and how has that led to your current role.
Did you want to go in any particular order, Courtney?
No, not at all. Whoever wants to volunteer. Ms. Connors, if you'd like to go first in order, we can do that as well.
Sure. That's fine. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to you, Courtney, for being the moderator for today's panel, and certainly to Sarah and to Suhyeon, who worked really hard on this. This is a wonderful invitation. It's a great conversation, and I really appreciate being a part of a panel with these highly esteemed leaders. Anne and I were classmates, so it's also really nice to be on a panel with someone I've known and admired for a really long time. So thank you. I attended law school for a pretty straightforward reason. Right after college, I went to work in New York City, and which is the most delegated form of government. So I was out there working day in, day out, trying to keep parks open, trying to keep beaches safe. I was working for the Parks and Recreation Department, so not doing anything legal except everything was legal, right? Everything was about how democracy works and how we resolve a lot of really important issues that are very close to home, peacefully and in a way that's productive. So I learned how to focus on metrics in government and how to be responsive and do a lot of those different things. But at the end of the day, I thought, I need to learn a little bit more about how this whole system of government and how democracy works, how we do peacefully resolve these issues. So I went to law school to learn more about really the framework of democracy. And it led to my current role, probably because as much as I do law in this job and appear in court and do those things, it really is about leadership and about how to lead the second branch of government. And I've done that as Attorney General, I've done that now here, doing that now here as U.S. Attorney. So different levels of government, but it's the same thing, right? As lawyers, we are leaders, and it's important for us to understand that government service is an institution that is vital. And I think these last few years have demonstrated how tenuous it is. So it is important that we have attorneys who are in government and doing what they can to ensure that our institutions are strong and keep us all safe and allow us to resolve all of our disputes peacefully.
Great, thank you.
I'm happy to go next if we're doing this in order, and just say aloha, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon from DC. It's really wonderful to be here. It is fantastic to see two former students in a very unusual first-year torts class now running this session. So thanks to you, and I wish I could be there. We could all be in person to share this moment, but I'm grateful for this this platform, for the opportunity to be in conversation in any event. I will say. I have a pretty cliche answer to that, which is that I went to law school to sort of change the world, right? I thought of this as an avenue for really understanding the systems and the way they work, and trying to steer them or shape them in a way that is more responsive and inclusive, and corrective, if you will, or reparative in their outcomes. And so that was really key to me. It was a very justice-oriented commitment. I also should share that we were, my family were immigrants, and an element of this as well was just the fact that we were immigrants, and there had to be a doctor and a lawyer and X, Y, and Z. And apparently, I was the most. Let's just say I was fighting for my rights at a very young age. But in any event, the law school was sort of the sensible pathway. But I also was we moved from Kingston, Jamaica to Jamaica, Queens. And this is, growing up in New York City in the 80s and 90s was a sort of a site for a number of things that Claire's mentioned and otherwise. And a lot of the environments that we grew up in were not equally healthful and safe and clean, and all of these issues that were acutely visible in our space and its impact on our lives, whether it was health, whether it was outcomes in school, et cetera. And so those, that reality, those tensions, those environments were very much true in the sort of 5 boroughs, but then also true at scale. So to sort of answer the second part of the question, which is like, how did I end up in the role? I mean, obviously teaching was an opportunity to think about various dynamics at scale, at different scales, right? In the local context, the state context, and the international context, where we see a lot of the same patterns repeating themselves. And being a professor allows for, shared perspectives from student to teacher, but also in the research exercise, you're really, I think, at your best when you're thinking creatively about how the law can do those things that I mentioned at the beginning of my answer. So the creative legal solutions is, really exciting. And then shifting now and being in the State Department, I certainly think in terms of our foreign policy, again, what I've learned as an immigrant, as someone who grew up in New York, as someone who has connections to a diaspora, there are a number of interconnections and interrelationships, again, both in the patterns that we experience, but also the possibilities coming out of those interconnections. So that's really exciting to me. It's why I wanted to attend law school and why I certainly have appreciated the opportunities it's afforded.
I'll go next. Thank you, Courtney, and the organizers. I feel very honored to be here on this panel with everyone this morning. I could give a lot of different answers to that question, but I'll say when I was graduating from law school and in early college, there were a number of landmark decisions that came out at the state level and at the national level. Here in Hawaii, there was the Patch decision that recognized established access and gathering rights and really changed the landscape of reaffirming rights that hadn't been recognized for a while. And there was also the Waihole water case, one of the first water restoration cases that brought water back to the windward sides after the leeward plantations closed. And those, for me, being, a young person and just learning about them, not from being in school, but just, from the community and how significant they were in the community, really made an impact. And then a few years later, when I was in college, I learned about the Rice v. Cayetana decision, which, as folks know, is a challenge to OHA voting, and to see the Supreme Court take, the history of dispossession of Native Hawaiians and blood quantum specifically that had been used as a tool of oppression, and really kind of flip that narrative that Native Hawaiians were, excluding others. It was, so shocking to see history refracted in those ways. So I kind of had these endpoints of my early college years, these formative experiences of the power of the law in a positive way and the power of the law to me in a negative way. And I had a long, trajectory between there and actually going to law school and where I am now. But I would say, that kind of the power of the law is something I think we all feel in our lives, and others have spoken to that, and to want to be able to be part of a movement for justice. Law school is, I think, a beacon for a lot of us who want to be part of that.
Thank you.
Hey, well, I'll jump in here, and I'm glad I didn't volunteer to go first, because in this esteemed panel of very accomplished legal professionals that are helping to change the world, I feel a bit sheepish because I am no longer actively practicing law. And the reason I ended up in law school was not necessarily so driven by a passion of understanding of what the legal profession and the study of law really meant. I didn't know a lot about it, but I think I was interested in my studies in international relations and economics, and understanding how policy and law internationally were really important. But I want to be real upfront, and I hope there's somebody in the 100 attendees here that can relate to this, is I probably stumbled upon the legal profession. I don't come from a family of lawyers or with a very deep understanding of what all of that meant. And I don't think I had as high a degree of understanding or awareness of how important the legal system was. So that's my very honest answer. It was a really important decision for me, and it ended up being really foundational to my path and my career, and it really orients the way I work, not just professionally, but in my nonprofit and board service and how I show up in the community. Thank you.
Hey, here I am at the end of the alphabet, and that's like perfect. I got to listen to everybody else's account of myself, and I can adopt a couple of them. You know, Leina, for instance, like I was listening to Leina, I was thinking, well, that's my story too. You know, and actually, Claire, you know, I remember being doing poverty law. My big ambition was to work for the poor, and so I ended up working for, you know, the legal aid foundations and all sort of stuff. But you realize how political it is. And I went to work in the public defender's office, and I found the same people I was representing at legal aid there in the tank, and I get to represent the same people with different legal problems. And I guess they put me on this panel in a way to sort of, you know, be the other side of your side of the bench. I used to go out and Jimmy just said, I wanted to be a lawyer partially. My dad was a lawyer also. He died before I got to know him. So I heard a lot of good stuff about him, and he was his commitment to the civil rights movement and to racial justice and all sort of stuff. So I think that I went into it. I applied for law school because I realized that I was going to survive the Vietnam War. I said, I better do something. I want to get out, you know, and I'm going to have to go back to work out there in the world. And so I applied to law school. UCLA, thankfully, took a chance on this crazy person and admitted me. And I have to say, though, too, you know, if it were not for the struggles of so many people, including my dad, the NAACP, and the civil rights movement, you know, a person of color, because there really were not very many of us there in the 60s, really, honestly, in law schools. And we knew, just like you all know, as women in the profession, it is our obligation to forge a path for other women, for girls, and to make sure that their rights and their recognition maintains in the face of decisions like Dobbs and stuff like that. So I didn't expect all this stuff to get dropped in my lap when I applied to law school. But, you know, I got here and you realize you can do some good through here. And that's like always been just an amazing blessing to be a helper, to be part of movements like Leina was talking about, of human rights and social justice, environmental justice, and making sure that there's nobody left behind. So it has been a great blessing for me to get a law degree.
You. That was great. That was a great way to end that segment of our questions. And I love hearing how everybody is so diverse in how they came upon law school, whether you stumbled upon it or whether you were intentional about it. I think everybody in law school finds, you know, different ways to come upon the path that they pursue. I wanted to segue into the next question from that. So, you know, you go to law school and you're navigating your first job as an attorney, as a lawyer. How did you encounter and respond to, you know, different types of gender discrimination or microaggressions? And, you know, do you have any words for words of advice, especially for trans, non-binary, and cis women attorneys who are entering the legal profession, who, you know, including myself, who may not know how to navigate that space yet? Yes, and please feel free to not go in order this time.
Yeah, I'm going to violate the order at the moment. But I think that, you know, the one thing I felt like, you know, when we first started off in the 60s and early 70s in the courts, there were so few of us that we really stood out. And I always felt that sense of, you know, we have got to really be good. We got to bring the most excellent possible work. And we've got to show up. Everybody, no matter what they want to say about us or how they want to look at us, our work will speak for itself. We've got to be that much better than everybody else. We feel that way. I felt that way as an Asian American lawyer in the 60s and as a transgender trial lawyer here in this 21st century. It's always a matter of you're going to be judged and everybody else is going to be judged in many ways by you. But if you suck, you know, that's the worst possible contribution you could make to your culture, your community, to everybody else that identifies with you. So let me say that part of it. I think that going into that that point of view that you're going to be surrounded by. It is always, I'm going to do the best possible work. I'm going to really prepare like crazy. I'm going to beat your butt. And I won't say anything about that, but I'm going to be so good. I'm going to be absolutely, I can't, unignorable. Stand out by your work, by your contribution, how well you practice, how much your clients are served, how well you serve them. And I always felt like that was a really simple task, but that's one thing we all can do.
Well, I have a few thoughts too. My first job was a clerkship, and then I was a trial attorney, but I was in government, and I think there is something to be said there. And the pay scales are kind of set. They're all trying to do the same thing. So it's not that I went, the private sector is different, but you eat what you kill. There's a whole lot of built-in institutional inequities that you're dealing with, and so a lot more happens there. But I will just talk about, being a mom, right? And even in government, there was a challenge there. And Loretta Sheehan, who was my colleague for a number of years, she told me early on when I learned I was pregnant with my first child, and even though, I was a government attorney and we didn't have PPL then, we didn't have paid parental leave at that time, we do now. But she told me a very important piece of information. She said, listen, you and I are responsible for the continuation of the human race, right? This is no small task, and it's something we have to navigate physically and professionally. And it was really important information for me to learn early on, because it wasn't just about having kids and all the different physical things that go through and all those things. It was just about how you deal with things of a personal nature, right? And we just have to. We don't have a choice. We have to if we decide to have children. And so I think a couple of things I learned from that, and that I do try to share, is threefold. One, it's your business. Right? And it's your decision. The personal decisions you make are yours 100%. You share them when you feel it's appropriate. You should feel comfortable sharing that. It's unfortunate that some of those burdens still fall heavily on us, but with PPL and parental leave applying to all, now it's less so. But it's important that you make that decision about when and how in an institution and a legal practice you want to raise those issues, including taking care of parents or any family member, right? And the second thing is what Mia said. If you are the best attorney you possibly can, you've earned your cred, you've developed your skill set, you've built your track record, that's going to be really important, no matter what types of challenges you face, being a woman or being someone trying to move in this space with the different things that we bring to the table. So 100% agree with what Mia said there. It's really, really important. And then the third thing I would say in this area is just, pick your battles. Right, and develop your strategy carefully. Right, we are going to face a lot of different things, a lot of different disappointments. Not all of them are an EEO complaint. Not all of them are the basis of a lawsuit. But every one of them is an opportunity to expand awareness within the group you're operating in, within the space, your family, your professional community. Sometimes there's subtle conversations we have, but it's important to be firm and clear and open-minded about those issues, and certainly not to shy away from them or to feel bad about them. That's absolutely not where you should go with that. It's your choice, and it's your place to decide how that conversation happens.
If I can jump in here. So I was thinking about, what is a specific story? When I was in law school, and I wasn't in law school that long ago, when we had to do moot court, I remember being told that it would be more appropriate for the female students to wear a skirt suit. And I remember going like, well, I don't want to wear a skirt suit. So I just share that kind of story because I do think we've come, it's those little things, those little nuances of kind of pushing back that seem silly. Claire said, pick your battles, but those are the things. I just became CEO about a year and a half ago, and I've been sharing this story recently to bring light to, even in this role, it's not microaggression or it's not meant to be biased or discriminatory, but the kinds of questions I get asked as a female CEO are very different. If I show up at a late night event or I'm at a business trip, I often get asked the question, oh, who's watching your kids? And I don't know if male CEOs are asked the same question. And so I don't get angry about it. I say, oh, my husband's watching my kids. Who's watching your kids, right? So I just think there are these little things that are so much a part of our culture, and the link to the wearing a pantsuit or a skirt suit or being asked. And the thing that comes with the ask is a judgment in choosing to be there as a career professional, showing up in the same way as your counterpart male might show up. But I definitely agree with what Mia and Claire say is be good at your job, right? Get most focused on that. And then it becomes easier to kind of poke and pull at some of the things that we see. And I just wanted to share the example as a law student and the example in the last year and a half as a new CEO.
Maybe I'll chime in here and just sort of share a little bit. It's I think related, but slightly different. In the first experience, I mean, there's tons of microaggressions, right? We've all experienced them, and the experience that is the one I would really like to focus on is my clerkship, the clerking experience. And I had the real privilege to work for a woman judge in the Northern District of California, which was not common necessarily, even in the early aughts. But it was a great opportunity. There was an obvious example where we had a juror in that in one of the criminal cases that was harassing the clerks. He was harassing every time he went to the bathroom, or like he was just when we crossed each other, it was just an obvious issue, and the ramifications of having to remove him from the jury was significant. And so it was one of those things where I could see the struggle that my judge was having, and like, do we just have to disband this jury, start this all over again? Like, what does this look like, versus actually moving forward on that? And so we had some intense discussions about that, and I'll set aside the details, but just say that there were tensions there that she had to face, in even correcting very obvious examples of gender discrimination or aggressions. But one piece I do want to also mention, I think, which is even more significant, is that we are at different frontiers over the course of our experience in entering the profession. And for her, what I also noticed was that, at that time, there was but one way to be a judge, right? And it recalled Lonnie Grenier's Becoming Gentleman, which is this sort of notion that there, in order to be a good legal scholar or to be a lawyer, you had to be one in the mold of a gentleman. And that is something that was quite significant and constraining and ever present. And so that, that might have predicted what you were expected to wear, or what color you wore, what style or shape or size, but also how you ran your office or engaged with your colleagues. And I think, excuse me, one of the next frontiers is really just being able to say, sort of break the mold, to think differently about what it means to be a competent person in the profession. And have that freedom to have that space be one that's not determined or shaped exclusively by gentlemen in particular. And so I think that's really important. I think we should embrace that. And in terms of thinking about, how we cope, I mean, I think the process has been about ensuring that we create spaces where women can be whoever they are. We can all be whoever we are in our professional space, and competence is going to be the lead versus what the dominant demographic would look like.
I'll be quick. Everyone's answers were so great and covered a lot of ground. I'll just give one example that I feel like a lot of women litigators might encounter early in their careers, is that if you attend a hearing or a mediation or a settlement conference with a senior supervising attorney, a male, normally male opposing counsel, or sometimes even judges, will often address themselves exclusively to the other male attorney. And that's just one of those situations where you have to, take responsibility for asserting yourself. And it sucks in some instances, but it's the reality that you're an advocate and you have a space and a platform and you can assert yourself. I mean, if it happens in a social situation, I think it's definitely appropriate to ask your supervising attorney and tell them, like, hey, that guy is always really rude. Can you be sure that, you reintroduce me when we bump into him again? But I feel like women might get that a lot, but as everyone pointed out, there's a certain amount of, there's times for institutional action, and then there's times where, you seek out your networks, you seek out your support, and you also take, action on your own behalf to make sure that that doesn't become an entrenched pattern with that other person, because you're likely to encounter them again and again.
Great. Thank you everyone for sharing. And Ms. Teranishi, just want to mention, someone commented, I was told by a judge that he preferred his prosecutors in skirt suits 20 years ago. And so they've worn pantsuits ever since. So, it's a comment that, and something that unfortunately women experience. We're going to move on then to our direct questions now. So I have a question generally for Professor Burkett, and then I want to open it up to our panel generally about how we can apply that to the workplace. So for Professor Burkett, as a former professor at the University of Hawaiʻi, William S. Richardson School of Law and Colorado Law, how can educational institutions promote a diverse and inclusive environment, supporting gender and racial diversity? And in your experience, what have educational institutions done well and what can they improve in? And then expanding to all the panelists, I'll give you all time to think, what in general do you think in the workplace can we do to promote a more diverse and inclusive environment?
Yeah, thanks. And I'll just offer obviously one perspective, because this question can be answered in so many really excellent ways, but sort of three broad thoughts: create space, reflect community, talk systems. And the first is, creating the space is ensuring that you have sort of everything from ground rules to the sort of level of trust between the, whoever's leading the conversation and everyone is a sort of student in the room, if you will, because we're all sort of learning new things, but be able to create the space to have conversations that go beyond the black letter, that allow for, comments that are maybe non-traditional, in the context of, the sort of Socratic method and, the law school, big lecture course style. That's really, really important, especially in courses and smaller seminars that really are requiring us to think differently about the text, or to engage critically with the circumstances around the particular, case that you're looking at, for example. And reflecting community, I do think as well, your curriculum, the cases you're choosing to teach, the guest lecturers that you have in the classroom should reflect this, the diversity of the student body, which was never, which was always a sort of a default state at Richardson, which is why I love it, right? But being able to reflect that diversity of thinking, of background, of all sorts of demographic characteristics, but being able to make sure that people see themselves in the actual work of legal education, which is not a given, and it certainly wasn't in my experience of law school. And then the last is about talking systems. In other words, especially when you're talking about things that are difficult, people can feel very defensive or feel very exposed in those difficult conversations. And so if we can talk about this in a way that doesn't allow the individual to be in the spotlight as much as the sort of the system in which the individual is operating, it becomes easier to kind of think critically, to tackle it, to again reinforce the safety of the space, I think, in a way that's effective, but also frankly kind of a better lens, given that so many of the things that we're grappling with are systemically created or reinforced. So those are kind of the I would say the sort of three guiding lights for me in thinking about this. And in terms of just how educational institutions can do well and what ways they can improve, this may seem like I'm pandering a bit, but I have to say, Dean Nelson is pretty remarkable at this. It's not just because she's my dean, but I've seen the work that she's been able to do in order to allow for the institution to really reflect, again, these kinds of questions of diversity and inclusion that are so critical, and whether it's along lines of gender or racial diversity, or the intersection of multiple, and in a practical way that allows for steps to be taken both in the near and longer term with impact. So I think she should write a guidebook, and we can I would defer to her on that. But those are some examples.
That's great. And for our panel generally, any thoughts or your opinions on how we should promote that in workplaces, and paralleling that?
I just wanted to say one thing about, I can remember, I go back, I'm very old, I'm the oldest person probably in this entire state of Hawaii. I go back to the time when judges used to insist upon women wearing dresses, and they would throw them out of the courthouse if they wore pants, and they would throw out witnesses and victims who had the pants on too, and it was that stupid. So that has obviously changed radically, and there's a lot of things that had to be changed radically. But I just want to say this because I remember the first Asian American women judges, and they all had infant kids. They had really young babies and kids, and they were so reluctant to take time off for those children because there were white boys, and I'll say it like it is, who were looking for them to fail, for looking for them to falter, figuring they're women, they're Asian American, they're weak, they're submissive. They will never be able to withstand the rigors of being a judge. Let me just say that, because that bullshit was all over the courts when I was there, and I remember witnessing their struggle and thinking, they shouldn't have to go through that. And just people should not be asking Anne about what's happening with your kids. It's like it's so demeaning to be able to talk to people that way when they have no experience with that part of life at all, especially. So all this stuff comes in a backdrop of, I hate to say it, it's white boys only was my affirmative action. That's what I grew up with. I'm old. I can testify to you that that's the way it used to be. And I meant white boys too, it's not even girls. So I'm not talking about, they didn't have that back in the day. So everything that you're doing is so important in its own way revolutionary, not just for this little profession and for this law school, but for all over this country and the world, women and girls. So, that is a critical issue that we're addressing. Every single one of you has been stepping through the door for that purpose. And I just want to say, take off my hat to you. Let me shut up.
I can jump in. I appreciate you starting with Professor Burkett, because my experience is that educational institutions are kind of on the leading edge of diversity initiatives, and they help to socialize terminology that we need to have hard discussions that might not be, well used in the larger workforce. And then they set that bar, and then the rest of the legal profession kind of follows in expanding, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion actually mean? And so, I think that there is value in initiatives just to have those trainings, which I know there's another question about the value of those, but again, we need a shared language. We're coming from very different perspectives, and, be it any type of difference that we're trying to talk across, we need to be able to communicate in a way and educate others about what we're going through. So while it's important to have safe spaces where you can share experiences with others like yourself, other women, other minorities, I do think it's important to move to the next step, which is how do we have these larger conversations and bring more people into a broader awareness of the power structures and the inequalities and structural barriers that people face. So that's one side of it. And then I do think, of course, real tangible hiring and representation is, of course, important. If your workforce kind of recreates the hierarchies that are already in society, and, everyone at the top is a white male and everyone underneath is a woman of color, there's going to be natural hierarchies that just come into the workplace. And so, of course, actually having women and people of color and positions of power and decision making in institutions is really important. But I think it takes both the cultural socialization side as well as the real action steps of hiring people.
What I might add to that is I really liked how Professor Burkett laid out those three pieces. In the business world, I think the most important thing that I think moves organizations and moves how we do business is the reflection of the community. And it is really heartening, I think, with some of the succession planning and generational change happening in all aspects of leadership. There are more women, there is much more diversity in the most executive roles, and that changes the complexion of the conversation. I also think that we as women can do more in terms of sponsoring and suggesting names of people, because the people who are sometimes in the decision-making spots have the same circle of network. And so as much as women take on in these roles, I really do push myself to work on networking and building support networks for emerging leadership in our community, both in not just in business and nonprofit and in government, because the more we see each other and the more we know, the more we can support and put forward names, because the systems, as Professor Burkett said, are just, they cycle in the same way. So we have to help to change the system. But to me, the most important starting point is seeing the representation. I think it makes it easier to move forward.
Championing others, lifting while you climb, ought to be something that's kind of always on our mind. There's so many great young people out there who could use a little shot of encouragement out there in the street, a little shout out to the people that might make a decision for them.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add then a couple 2 cents. Everything that has been said is absolutely right. When you're talking about the workplace in particular, you're not necessarily talking about the legal framework or how we're going to debate the laws. A lot of that exists, and it's got to be kind of a big, significant issue for you to really go there. But it's all the cultural issues and all the same conversations that we've been having for a very long time. So you're really just trying to move the needle. You're trying to build solidarity. You're trying to suss out you're just having sort of a bad day or a bad week or bad issue, or there's something really fundamentally there in the workplace that needs to be addressed. And you need that solidarity. You need that. You can't be in an echo chamber. You can't be alone. You've got to have those resources. And I will just share in terms of what Anne just said about going out there. When I was asked to be the Attorney General, I thought was, oh my gosh, you've got so much going on. I've got young kids, I've got all this stuff. And the person who asked, who was a woman, who was doing exactly what Anne just described, going out, saying we need more people who are reflective of the community, who are women, going out there doing this. She said, well, Claire, if you don't go into this job and figure out how to handle all this stuff, who will? And I thought, oh my gosh. So, and she was right. She was I had to be on the cutting edge. And as Attorney General, there were 56 attorneys general, and only 9 of us were women. And I think only 3 of us had children, right? So it really was the case that we as attorneys general who were figuring out what lawsuits to bring, especially in the prior administration, whether it was going to be defending Title 10 or whatever it was, the fact that in the real world, I was dealing with a lot of these issues and really receptive to them in a way that wouldn't have been the case if I had said yes to that job, made a big difference. So, and there was solidarity with the 9 of us who were the women attorneys general, and even now there is solidarity amongst those of us who are women U.S. attorneys. So you do need to build that, because you need people to bounce these things off of and decide when it's really time to go to the mat, or when it's time to figure a different way to address some of these cultural issues.
Great, thank you, everyone. And Ms. Teranishi, thank you for jumping onto one of your questions, which was how can we, elevate women? How can we nudge them into these positions of leadership and, make sure that business and legal communities are doing that part? Ms. Yamamoto, if I may turn to you now, we had a question which I think kind of mirrors what we had wanted you to answer anyway, but on a day-to-day practical level, how do you think state court judges can ensure their courtrooms are inclusive of transgender, non-binary individual court users? Being a part of the judiciary and law enforcement systems, you can experience discrimination in those settings. And what do you think can be done for more systemic change?
For most of the judges, and I actually do training for the judges on transgender issues. And one of the things I tell them is that I think it'd be a good idea with your nameplate to put your pronouns on the nameplate. I think when people walk into that courtroom, whether they're witnesses, litigants, or anybody else, if they see your pronouns on your nameplate, I believe that gives you a hint that you might be welcome here. The other part of it is expressing out front, saying how would you like to be addressed? What is your preferred name? What is your preferred pronouns? It's a small thing in a very, if you've been in busy courtrooms, you all know that it's like you haven't got a lot of time with each person. But quick things like that absolutely make a huge difference. Small things make a big difference. I believe that most of the judges are just like everybody else. They've never met another transgender person in their life. They certainly never had one come up and argue motions in front of them. And they need to have that level of humanity exposed to them so they have any way to put themselves in other people's shoes. So I feel like every time I walk into a courtroom, I'm absolutely liberating that courtroom. I mean, whatever they're seeing here and whatever I'm doing, they will not be able to unsee this. And it's going to affect the way they look at a community. And you know, again, so we're hyper aware of that. I think all women are hyper aware of that, even in today's environment. And I hate to say it, but some of the women who are entrenched at the top of a lot of superstructures, and Claire could attest to this, a lot of them are the old-fashioned type that want you to be as old-fashioned as them. And that's the only way they're going to mentor you, or they're going to lift you up and that type of thing. So everybody is always this, and I think women have this biggest struggle: be yourself. It is so much more important to be yourself than to be anybody else's idea of what you should be. I learned that in my life. But the main thing is you're always more effective when you're owning yourself and you're presenting yourself, and it's always more authentic. I believe it's always more credible and persuasive if you kind of lean to that core identity when you're talking about what you're doing in a courtroom. Is that actually a question? I don't even know if I answered it.
No, that was great. That was, no, you're so right though. It's the little things, right? I mean, to make people feel seen and heard, and to affirm, you know, who they are. Yeah, that was great. And I love what you said earlier. I just have to say, lifting while you climb. I really love that. I haven't heard that, but that's so impactful and powerful.
That's for all women though too. Think about that when you see other women, you meet young women, you know, think about, which one am I going to lift while I climb here? Who's going to come with me on this journey?
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to turn now to Miss Lei. I know, correct me if I make some errors in the question, but as a Native Hawaiian woman practicing law, and in particular being a lawyer focused on Native Hawaiian rights, environmental law, how does culture inform your practice or influence, I guess, how you practice? And what's your advice to other Indigenous women or other Native Hawaiian women interested in pursuing this line of work?
Yeah, so I have a variety of different types of cases at Earth Justice, and I definitely feel honored and privileged to have the kuleana to represent Native Hawaiian communities and individuals in resource protection cases that, you know, benefit the whole community. We all need a clean and healthy environment, but also specifically benefit those communities that have special relationships and practices that depend on the health and survival of those resources. And it's a really, you know, special area to practice as far as culture informing the practice. Our clients are leaders in their communities. They have this amazing ike about the places and the resources and the species that they work with. And so we bring the courtroom expertise and legal expertise, and they bring, you know, their deep-seated knowledge of place that it's kind of we call it co-powering community, where the legal leaders and they're the storytellers that are, you know, really helping to make change in their own communities. And that's really essential and important to how we practice law at Earth Justice. And then, you know, for myself, I grew up on Kauai, and that's where I, you know, had a lot of exposure to Aina-based values and lifestyles that really inform, you know, my vision of a just, sustainable Hawaii being someplace that people, local families and Native Hawaiian families can continue to do the things that, you know, provide for them: fishing, hunting, gathering, generational practices that, you know, sustain them. And that being kind of a foundational vision for what I want to see. I'm not a cultural practitioner. I wouldn't consider myself someone raised in a traditional cultural way, but those are the communities I come from and that I want to uplift and serve in the work that I do. And my advice, you know, to other young Native Hawaiian attorneys that want to come into this field is, you know, similar to what other people have said, as lawyers, there are certain foundational skills that you need to acquire: legal research and writing, oral advocacy, and these you can acquire in many different ways: judicial clerkships, different types of practices, and you can always have an end goal of giving back to your community and where you want to end up. And as long as you acquire those foundational skills along the way, you can, you know, shape your career trajectory for the long run.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. My next question will be for Ms. Connors, and then I want to open it up to all our panelists generally. You know, as the current United States Attorney for Hawaii and former Hawaii Attorney General, in your experience, what aspects of practice do you find most fulfilling and most frustrating? And in general, for everyone here, what do you think law schools can do to prepare women and gender minorities to successfully engage and deal with these difficult aspects of legal practice?
Okay, great, thanks. Thanks, Courtney. So I do think that, you know, I've been at this for now a few decades, and I've had a lot of different practice areas. As Attorney General, you're on all sides of the V at all times, right? You're just bringing cases, defending cases, you're giving advice, you're doing administrative work, and now as the U.S. Attorney, I'm doing mostly the prosecution side on both the criminal and the civil side. And then as a civil litigator, it's dealing with people who had been broken by someone else's negligence, right? So I think there are those some commonalities, and it's to ping off a little bit of what Mia said, but also what Justice Duffy once said. I heard him once say that lawyer is a healing profession. It's a profession of helping. And I think that's been a very important way for me to frame my job. We're counselors, right? That's what we do. We provide counsel to our clients, to the courts, to the public, as they tackle the different challenges that they're facing. And it's a great honor, it's a great responsibility, but it means that it's not about us, right? So our story is not what's at issue. It's the client's story, it's their challenge. Now, of course, all of us here are where we are because our story is part of why we're doing what we're doing. But if we think of ourselves as counselors who are dealing with broken laws or broken people, I think you can go a long way to finding the professional satisfaction that keeps you going, right? So it is as much as you can bring to the table, as much as you can help, as much as you can heal. And oftentimes you can only take the client so far, right? Oftentimes, be it the way the law is framed, the way the arguments pan out, the way everything happens, you can't take them the full way. And that's okay, because there will be other ways that you can get there. Maybe you have to then leave the courtroom in the third branch and go to the first branch. Maybe there's different things you can do, but then that might not be directly in your representative capacity. One of the challenges is now as a prosecuting attorney, you know, I took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America, and I have to uphold justice with the larger kind of framework attached to it, which means both those who we are prosecuting, the defendants, I have to look out for their Sixth Amendment rights, their Fourth Amendment rights, their Fifth Amendment rights, and that can be a really big deal, right? It's a lot to have that on your shoulders. But it is part of a very clear mission of justice. And I think if you can find the right people, if you can find the right team, if you have the right colleagues, then it'll be something that you'll continue to find fulfilling, even as it's very challenging, even as you're going to battle day in, day out in court. And then just to touch on your last question there about what law schools can do, it comes back to that theme. Law schools need to make sure that we are producing really competent attorneys, right? Our work is within institutions, right? We work within the third branch, we work on behalf of the second branch. And for legislators, we work in the first branch. So we need to know the rules, we need to be adept at following the rules, and when they don't work, we need to figure out how to amend them or change them, right? And the second thing is our profession is an apprenticeship, sort of what, you know, Liz said, right? We have to figure out all the different ways we can learn how to be better advocates, and we need to continue to look for those opportunities to perfect those skills. I also think it's important not just to deal with the big issues, but we have to teach lawyers how to deal with the small issues, right? Details, strategy, ethics, all those things, running a business, managing people, all those things are really important things that I think the law school has an obligation to focus on, or at least foster that opportunity. And then last of all, you just want to make sure that everybody knows that you're becoming a leader. And there are specific skill sets that you need to have, and the law school can benefit everybody who's this profession if they can just teach basic leadership skills.
That's great. Okay, I know I asked all the panelists to answer that question, but I see we're coming up on time. So I would love if everyone can share in a minute or so, you know, just advice generally that you have for women of color, gender minorities who are in law school, thinking about law school. I know we've touched upon many of them throughout the panel, and I'd love for everyone to share just something they're proud of personally that they've they've have, whether that's in their personal career, their professional career, just celebrating accomplishments, because we wanted this panel to be a celebration of all of you, of women. And yeah, please have the floor.
Let me just say this real quick. I always like to tell you that you're going to hear a lot in terms of advice to students about, I used to hear this all the time. Be careful of your reputation. It's all you got. If that's all you got, you've got nothing. I always say, pay attention to your integrity. Don't worry about what people are saying about you. That's like a really awful thing to have worrying about. It matters what you think of yourself way more than what anybody else thinks of you. And the other part of it is for law students in general. Let me just say this: what you do for profit and what you do for money and compensation, that will support you. And that what you do for free, that will define you.
I know.
Sorry, go ahead, Anne.
No, I think, while I'm not actively practicing the law, I just wanted to share, no matter what path you take, the legal background and the thinking, and even thank you so much for including me in this panel, the opportunity to sit in just bright, brilliant people who are steeped in the practice of law still kind of makes me long to go back. And, banking's not always so easy too. There was a question in the chat that I did want to address. Somebody asked about leave policies. Businesses are pushing forward, and the bank is very progressive in this space. I'm not trying to recruit, but I think it is happening and people should talk about it. We provide 16 weeks of paid family leave for men and women, and then an additional 4 weeks, 20 hours, they can come back half time. That is a huge shift. It wasn't easy to absorb, even from a productivity standpoint and supporting as people left, but I'm really proud. And I think look for businesses and organizations doing that, because that's the thing that equalizes. And we really are trying to make it easy for people to have their time with their children, adopted or whether they gave birth, to come back. So it's happening. It's not as fast as we'd like it to see, but look for that and ask for that.
Yeah, I was going to just say, I think there was a long pause after Mia's comments. I'm glad there was, because that really needs to settle in, right? I think so many people are driven by reputation, but integrity is really the core. It's powerful. I want to foot stomp that, and I'm going to put it on my wall and on my door. But I also want to just sort of share that, I feel every day that I'm the product of an incredible, an innumerable number of women and men, and that had done so much to get me where I am, and we're sort of part of that story still, right? So we're sort of part of that entail of it. Has the book's not done yet, right? Everything hasn't been written, but the struggle has been about providing us opportunities to have innumerable choices and the ability to make those choices. It's not about getting to one end state. It's about being able to create an environment in which we are free to have choices and make choices. And so I think really remembering that is going to be key. You don't have to fit into any particular mold. You are hopefully guided by what you see as living a life full of integrity and dignity, and seeing the dignity in others. And so again, keeping a perspective on what this is all about and how we've gotten even to this moment, again, on the shoulders of others, those who actually were lifting while they climbed, is really important, and seeing ourselves again as part of that longer journey, really key. And a practical day-to-day level, grab your mentors, find a mentor, grab that person. Sometimes we tend to be very hesitant to reach out to that person, but I think it's so important. I love when it happens. And it really does make a difference to just be able to know that what you're experiencing, to not be gaslit, to be affirmed, and to, again, see yourself as part of a larger story.
I'll jump in. One of the best pieces of advice I got was in college, and I had a professor tell me, know your friends and who supports and uplifts you. And we're all out there fighting to make change in the community. We're fighting to make change in our institutions, and you do need that rest space of community and people who see you for who you are and uplift that. And it might not always be obvious. Lawyers are busy. Someone might not come up to you and say, I want to be your mentor. But if somebody, you know, shows interest in your work and your trajectory, appreciate that and understand it for what it is. And really quick, I wanted to thank Claire. I don't know if she remembers, she met with me just really briefly about 10 years ago when I was at a transition period during my career. And that's just an example of a woman making time to speak to another woman. And I thank you. I wanted to share that.
You're very welcome. That's a great segue to, I think what I would say is that, listen, we have a lot that we can learn as lawyers, right? Law school, a law degree is our ticket. It's our ticket to do what it is we feel we have to do in this world, in this life, in this profession. But it's also really important that we realize that when it comes to mentorship and decisions, it's us, right? We are our own best mentor. And as folks have said, making decisions and learning how to make decisions, whether it's in the moment in trial, whether it's in the arena while you're doing battle, or whatever it is our best skill set. And we develop that. And so we develop it by looking outside to those that we want to pull onto our board of directors, I call it, right, our mentors. But then we look inside, and we always check back and forth with how it is as people, where it is and lines up with our own sense of integrity and our sense of purpose. But at the end of the day, if we can keep that moving, and it's a process one should never, ever stop engaging in, no matter where you are in your profession, then I think we're going to do a lot just to be professionally fulfilled as people who are in the arena, getting beat up, doing what we need to do, but also who are helping and who are helping to heal our individual clients and much larger issues that we're doing.
Oh, that was amazing. That was a great way to end the panel. Thank you all so much for your time. And before we end, I just want to take a couple of photos, if it's all right with everyone, for our law review panel as best we can. I'll count down from 3, and then a couple of law review members will take the photos really quickly. Okay, are you ready? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Did we get it? Got it, Suhyeon? Okay, awesome. Thank you all so much for your time and your mana'o and your everything. It was beautiful. And I'm so honored to have been a part of this panel. But stay tuned, everyone, for our next panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all to our amazing panel and participants for being here today. It is truly so special to have such accomplished women in law together in one room, and very inspiring, especially as a law student, to hear about your diverse experiences and pathways in your legal careers.